I am very, very pleased to introduce our moderator for this panel, a longtime friend and collaborator, Gene Polizinski. He is the Chief Operating Officer of the Museum Institute, which includes the Religious Freedom Center, the First Amendment Center, and the Museum ED, and this place, let's just face it. So Gene's the man. Thank you for this gorgeous building. Thank you for the beautiful weather as well.
Glad to help out there.
Anytime. Gene is one of the founding editors of USA Today. He oversees all the programs of the Museum Institute and is also a longtime proponent of diversity in journalism as an essential element of a free press. And I can't think of a more timely time to be having this discussion than now. So Gene, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Steve. Well, let me add the welcomes I hope you've already had to being here at the museum and to Fassi and the work that goes on around these annual meetings and has gone on for some time. I think one of the posits that I would propose right from the start is that this is an issue, while it may be in our brains and forebrains because of the very disruptive experiences that we've all seen, regardless of ideology during this campaign, and the larger question is really what has come before, what will come after, and while it may bring these issues to fore for the moment, we have a chance, and you have a chance to talk about and to work on these issues that are rooted in much broader kinds of concerns, much more long term. So I've been trying to convey that message at a number of sessions lately because we're so focused right now on what's been happening in the last few months. But these, as you all are here and know, larger concerns. Joined on the podium today by Jacqueline Boucher, who is Chief Online Safety Officer at Microsoft, Dr. Megan Moreno, who is from the University of Washington and also works with the Seattle Children's Research Institute, Patricia Cortez, Head of Global Safety Outreach for Twitter, and Tony Gonsalves, who is Senior Vice President for Strategy and Business Development at AT&T. And I love the good diversity of perspectives here. But in discussing our format, because we recognize that unlike a typical audience, many of you, if not all of you, are experts in your own ways to bring things here. We'll try to move to your questions rather quickly, but we thought it was good to hear from each of the panel members here, both for you to get a sense of perspective, for them to emphasize the things that they're seeing as maybe in the front of their work. So, Ms. Boucher, if I may begin with you and talk about Microsoft's approach to this whole issue of hate speech and from a First Amendment guy's standpoint, this explosion of an exchange of ideas, often I think in ways that when the internet was new, we didn't totally envision. So can you talk for a moment about what Microsoft is doing and your concerns at the moment?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. I wanted to start by saying what Microsoft's approach is generally to online safety. We have sort of a four-part approach that we talk about. We focus on internal governance, so making sure that the appropriate policies and standards and procedures are in place for us to govern these issues on our services. We also focus on technology. Obviously, we're a technology company, so innovation and investments. We want to make sure that the appropriate capabilities and features and functionality are in our products from the get-go so that we're seeing family safety, individual safety protections in the products at the outset. We also engage in partnerships and outreach, and then finally educational initiatives, informal educational initiatives, as well as public awareness raising. So when it came to hate speech, we have always had a long-standing prohibition on Microsoft services where we allow for user-generated content. We want to make sure that we are not, in fact, allowing hate speech. And that is articulated in our code of conduct. We have a 10-point code of conduct. It's basically a list of thou shall nots. And point number 7 is communicating hate speech, among other things. That's listed as one example. We don't want people putting themselves at risk, the services at risk, or others at risk. So we enumerate that clearly. What we did come out with just a couple of months ago at the end of August was some new reporting resources to make it easier for people to report hate speech to us when they see it on our hosted consumer services. So basically we have a dedicated web reporting form now that if you see something that looks like hate speech, you don't have to say or know exactly how we're defining it or how others may define it, but you can report that to us, we will address it, and we will take it down and block it if necessary. We don't always get things right. Not everyone does. This is new territory for everyone. So we've also instituted yet another new form where you can ask for your content to be reconsidered for reinstatement. So if you feel that we've rejected something or taken something down in error, we want you to be able to report that to us so we can aim to correct it. And we do that across all of our services for all types of content. So it's not just if you think we removed hate speech in error. It would be anything that we potentially removed in error. And that form is also listed in that blog post. You could find that on Microsoft on the issues. If you just do Microsoft on the issues hate speech, a search on Bing or other search engines. And,
may exist somewhere out there.
And just do that search and you'll see the two new forms. And I'll talk about some other things as well, but we could start with that.
Well, one of the things that I was struck by is that there's always this inherent tension. The First Amendment, which does not apply to a private company, by the way, applies to the government. The First Amendment protects hate speech to a place where it generates conduct. We don't restrain the ideas. And it's a very difficult task, I would think, I've read the guidelines. I think and with this response on why it shouldn't be taken down, you, I think, addressed some concerns with that. What's the parsing really of what considered hate speech? Is it speech that's going to lead to conduct? Is it, in the end of developing your approach?
We're basically looking at content that would promote hate based on what are largely a series of immutable characteristics, whether it be hate, age or disability or gender or national ethnic origin, race, religion, etc. And I will say that we don't have the kind of interactive platforms, like we're not a social media company, we're not a video sharing platform, so we don't see the volume that others are seeing. But to that extent, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing something about it and that we can't take a stance as well.
Thank you. Dr. Moreno, you had thought that you might bring us the National Academy's report on bullying and some recommendations that apply there, and then perhaps another report on the usage of media. So.
Sure. So I'm an adolescent medicine physician and researcher at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's, and my research focuses on the intersection of adolescent health and technology. But today my main role is to be here as a representative of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I was a committee member on the Committee for the Biologic and Psychological Effects of Peer Victimization. And as a committee, we spent over a year reviewing the current state of the science on the literature surrounding bullying as well as cyberbullying. And we generated this report from that year of work that really represents a compendium of the current state of the science regarding bullying and cyberbullying. And our study staff lead, Susan Lemenestrel, is here today, and she brought me an extra copy, so if anyone wants one after, I have an extra. And one of the charges that we had as a committee was to come up with recommendations after reviewing this huge body of science and clinical literature. And from those recommendations, we directed one of those 7 recommendations. We were only able to present 7 total recommendations from this huge compendium. And in a slightly unusual move, one of the recommendations is directed at social media companies. And that's with the recognition that technology platforms today represent the second most common place where bullying takes place. We recognize through our review of the literature in this report that most of the science has focused on school-based bullying, but that in today's world, much of what adolescents experience, they experience online and often on social media platforms. And so I'll briefly just read the recommendation, which reads, social media companies, in partnership with the Federal Partners for Bullying Prevention Steering Committee, should adopt, implement, and evaluate on an ongoing basis policies and programs for preventing, identifying, and responding to bullying on their platforms, and should publish their anti-bullying policies on their websites. So I'm happy to have further discussion about this report as our panel moves along.
When you talk about that from the standpoint of that report, particularly, recommending that they post, pursue, and follow up. Do you dive into each of those three categories in any particular depth in terms of the kind of technology or recommendations that you might make to a social media outlet?
I think that a big emphasis on what we wanted this recommendation to come across as is the partnership piece. The idea that we're all navigating this new landscape together, and that our hope would be that these types of approaches would be done in collaboration and partnership with each other, as well as with the federal partners for bullying prevention, so that nobody feels like they're having to reinvent the wheel on their own.
Well, as it happens, moving to social media, Ms. Cortez, one of the things that I think is entirely evident now is just and it wasn't that many years ago, even at these groups where we were seeing 2% or 8% of people engaged in certain kinds of things, is the now absolutely pervasive, and I mean that in a very positive way, pervasive aspect of social media. What is the approach now? I know you have new initiatives at Twitter. What are the new approaches going on there? Just recognizing this new universe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here to represent Twitter, but I have worked on safety in other companies for a number of years. And the first thing I wanted to say is just when you look around this room, the number of safety partners that are here that have been really shaping the way that industry takes action is absolutely incredible and very unique in the world. So thanks to Fossey for bringing everybody together. I think today we have heard a lot of research, like Amanda presented a very clear picture, so did Congresswoman Clark and Ambassador Russell. And I just wanted to say from the get-go that in every technological company that I have worked on, we have felt a great deal of responsibility. We have created platforms that have disrupted the way that people communicate. Yeah. And as a consequence, you also see bad actors who try to abuse this power of communication for harmful purposes. And so we do have this responsibility, and I have seen a development in the way these tech companies approach the issue. In the case of Twitter, I joined 3 years ago, and Twitter is a different platform because we're public, we are open, and we're conversational. And so we see 1 billion tweets every 2 days. So you can imagine that is an incredible amount of content flowing through the platform. And it took 3 years, 2 months, and 1 day to see that first billionth tweet, but we're now seeing this every 2 days. And so what's really key is for us to engage with experts on the prevention and the detection, but also on the empowerment piece so that users know how they can protect themselves to prevent engagement with harmful content. You have mentioned the latest developments, and we've had hate speech policies for as long as I have been in the company. Just very similar to what Jacqueline was describing for Microsoft, we have our Twitter rules, which are public, and they are public because we want the users to also understand what our expectations of behavior are. And I think that's very key to this discussion. We often tend to think about the worst type of troll, but the reality is that the majority of the negative content that we see comes from normal users that on normal interactions have been triggered by something and they start engaging in a non-constructive way. And we as society have to think about how do we bring those people back into compliance? How do we show them how to engage in a constructive way in these communication platforms? And so at Twitter, what we're looking at is conduct. And we had this discussion just a second ago, like hate speech versus hateful conduct. On Twitter, you'll always see that we refer to hateful conduct because we're looking at a pattern of behavior. How is a person behaving on the site? How can we bring them back into compliance? Or are they in the 10% of any extreme ideology where you can't bring them back and by engaging in counter-narratives and counter-speech? And so over the last few weeks, what we have done is clarify more the way we enforce our rules. We have retrained everybody who's looking at abuse cases. The way abuse happens in one country is different to the way abuse happens in another country. And actually, one example I always like to give is something that we saw in India a couple of months ago, where you would have certain users saying to women, take a bus. If you see that in the US, it might not mean much, but for anybody who's familiar with the sexual assault case in Delhi a couple of years ago, in India that has a different implication.
Occurred on the...
Exactly. So for us, the key is context, is being clear with the users, having very clear rules, having a strong enforcement, and doing support in a way that scales. You may have the perfect rule perfectly drafted, but if you can't enforce it in a way that scales, you're not really going to help the community blossom.
Mr. Gonzalez, some specific programs in your company. Can you talk about those for a moment?
Yeah, look, a little bit of context. I'm here representing AT&T, a company that is committed to providing awareness, right, and education on these issues, given that we are the enabling connectivity for a lot of what we've been talking about here. But I'm almost here as a parent today. I'm a parent of a 13 and 10-year-old, two wonderful kids, and this is the first time that as a career has intersected with my personal life, and I feel very fortunate to be able to bring the two together. Anybody that has young kids like mine that are in that transitionary period sees a lot of this happen. The time they spend with technology, the bullying isn't physical, the dialogue isn't direct, it's indirect. And it's important that we bring awareness and education not only to the kids but to the parents on what that next social media platform is, what roasting might be within a group chat, why that's important. And I think AT&T has done a phenomenal job at really kind of leaning into these social issues. It started with the It Can Wait campaign about texting and driving. It's now moved on to this particular topic with two programs that are just fantastic. One, brand new, called the Later Hater campaign. It's a social campaign intended to empower the youth that is being bullied or that is bullying to speak out and to speak out in the forum where this is all happening on social media with the hashtag that they're familiar with and in the language that they're familiar with. And so Later Hater is a social campaign. We're on a variety of social platforms, and we're bringing in social influencers to go out and really speak about the topic of cyberbullying. And then the second is a really great program that we have in partnership with Common Sense Media to, again, educate parents and educators on the topics of media usage, types of content that that appeal to different audiences. We take their ratings for media content, apply them in our media products, our DirecTV services, as an example, to give parents an idea of what that particular show might or might not include for their kids. And beyond that, there's a Digital U. Digital U is a platform, an educational platform where we partner with Common Sense to provide data and information for parents, educators, and even our own employees to go out and really educate on the topics that we're discussing here today.
Great. Well, I want to do that dreaded moderator moment where I ask you the multi-part, multi-dimensional question that, and I hope you'll bear with me, but it occurs to me, both before this panel and listening to you, that how much of the future responsibility is providing tools for others to use, and how much of it is tools that you have to assume on your own and create your own? And I want to ask that question, this is the complicated part, but in the context of the growth of interconnectivity, for lack of a better term, where we're going to see more growth outside of areas in the next 10 or 15 years in parts of the world with not this sort of, frankly, Western European, North American value structure, that where there was common terminology, common understanding, as you, I think, accurately pointed out with India. A phrase here that would attract no attention at all had huge volume of meaning in India. But when you look at that division of responsibility and education and guidelines, for example, it's going to become incredibly complicated as more and more world users really dominate the content and the use of social media and the web. Where do you see first the responsibility ultimately now in the future? Is it for you developing tools or providing tools to others? and then try to put that in that global context, because I think it's a problem we haven't adequately addressed here, because we've seen it grow up sort of San Francisco to, now in Europe, and all of a sudden, the rest of the world is going to be here. And now that I've thoroughly terrorized everybody, who would like to jump in on that first and pick any part of that question? But I think it's a very important dichotomy that when we talk about tools and empowering people, a new group of people is coming on board. Please.
I'll start.
You certainly are, in your company, global in a way that not many others are.
Sure. And we say this about many aspects of online safety, but it really is a shared responsibility. Everyone has a role to play. It's not just the technology companies. It's the technology companies to create the tools, to put the safeguards in place, to give the guidance, to educate about the risks. And it's also a governmental responsibility. It's law enforcement has a responsibility. And of course, the user, his or herself, and as families have a responsibility. So everyone has a role to play to create sort of that, the kind of social norms and the kind of atmosphere and the kind of web experience that everyone wants. And it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah.
There's going to be changes, and we're going to have to manage through those as we do offline as well.
I would add something else to that, which is, as these platforms evolve, safety needs to be at the design and at the core. When I first joined Twitter, you couldn't share links, you couldn't share images. And so we didn't have reporting mechanisms for those, and we didn't see abuse to the extent that we see it now. So I see safety as an ongoing task. As the sites evolve, we have to continue to provide safety mechanisms, and I think that will always be our responsibility. What I think civil society is the key player is when it comes to education, because we are talking to an adult audience. A lot of us are not digital natives, and oftentimes we're talking in a patronizing way to those digital natives. And we have to think about how safety is going to look in 10, 15, 20 years' time when the digital natives are the main players and they are in these roles. And so I would just love to see how we start incorporating them in the discussions, but also how safety will remain at the core, but civil society, who really are the experts on that education piece, can help us incorporate them in the discussions globally, not just in the US, but as you said, around the world.
Tony, you said you came here as a parent as well. How much will this be educating adults, educating parents? And the dimension changing as more and more people grew up in the environment? We're going to see, what I would hope would be a blossoming of understanding about how these platforms work from people who weren't digital natives to people who are? Or...
Yeah, look, that's the passion point that struck me on this particular topic. Is I'll share with you a personal story about our family. I mean, we were on a train, and I needed a device to check on the Giants score, and mine was dead. I grabbed one of my kids' devices and connected and went on the browser, and I hate to say that I was mortified by what I saw, but I was shocked by what they're looking for. And it's all, when you think about it, it's so innocent, but what they get back is not so innocent. And I went through a bit of a moment where I said, okay, I'm going to strangle this kid. Not literally.
A very shared parent moment I'd like to point out in this group.
Not literally. And I stepped back and I said, she's probably more mortified than I am.
Yeah.
And so I actually looked internally to myself and said, I am in this space, and I didn't know how to put these preventive measures in place, or didn't even think to put these preventive measures in place. And instead of looking for the Giants score, they lost, by the way, that day. A common thing in New York these days. I went on, I searched for, how to restrict an iDevice.
Yeah.
And I did it. We had a conversation, and we enacted rules within our family as to how you engage with those devices. So we didn't punish, we used it as a way to teach. And so that was the moment where I realized, if I'm in this space and I forgot to even think about that as a gate, what about folks that are not? And so I think it's not just parents, I think it's educators as well.
And Dr. Marino, also healthcare providers. That was something we chatted briefly about. What's the role of that other part of structure? Which again, I think, as a parent, I would not have thought to talk to the doctor who saw my children when they were young, the pediatrician. But we've seen that in other areas where suddenly they got engaged in certain campaigns about health that were, I think, by a sort of common understanding, like, oh, my doctor does that. There was a study, I think, and what do we know from that health standpoint, if that's
Sure.
appropriate to talk
I
about
think
right
that
now?
if we think about physicians and pediatricians in particular interacting with kids, we're really interested in the whole health of the child. And so I think it really becomes incumbent upon us to do check-ins with kids at their health supervision visits about how their life is going both online and offline. And as an adolescent medicine physician, I can tell you I see kids every week who come in for stomach aches or headaches, and if you take time and drill down a little further, you find out that the headache started when they were bullied online, or the stomach ache started when someone shared an embarrassing photo on Facebook. And so I think that we as physicians are coming to the understanding that the online world and the offline world have this really important effect on kids' health, both their mental health and their physical health. But what we struggle with a lot is that many of us as physicians weren't trained to counsel in this area. And so, for example, at the American Academy of Pediatrics, we've been working on building tools that physicians can use and can offer to parents to be able to help them navigate that world together.
My background is largely in journalism, and one of the things that I've watched a sort of arc in terms of safety is not quite the word, but discourse, civil discourse, was the great hope that when we all put those little chat areas below stories, I think a lot of journalists thought that first people would be talking to the reporter or about the issue, and there was a great rise in the number of those
love
rooms.
reading those.
They're good. Where they still exist, because one of the things that has been disappointing to me, and I do the same thing. If they're there, I read them. Was the arc is now down, where people are getting off because 5 comments down, it diverges completely from the point of the story and into insults and somebody's conversation carried over from an entirely different venue. So I would say if I rated the civil discourse capability now within journalism, I would say it's less than it was 10 years ago because of this pullback from chat rooms. And I want to say that this is my last moment. I'm going to depend on the rest of you after this and offer an opportunity to talk to these great people. In terms of online safety, you have a great many efforts going now for a period of time, and then you have your work, but you have this explosion and, again, the ubiquitous nature of it, just exponentially. If you all predicted it, I'm in awe because I know I didn't see it coming in the way that it spread. Safer or not today for a young person to go online? Just generally, from each of your very different perspectives, I think. Is it safer or more dangerous?
I'd like
Do you
to
have a
think,
way?
I'd like to think that it's safer,
Okay.
but there, again, under that notion of shared responsibility
Right,
and everyone's responsibility, there are safeguards that can be put in place. There are guardrails that can be put in place. So there are tools there, and we can create the tools, but it's that, you can lead a horse to water kind of conversation, right? So we have to make sure that they're being used. Yeah. And I think the conversation with the parent or the physician, or that kind of open communication about what could go wrong, and we all talk about building resilience in the child to make sure that things aren't perfect online, things aren't perfect in life, and they have to be equipped mentally and physically and emotionally to be able to deal with those kinds of issues. So it takes.
Yeah, and again, I realize that it may be an unanswerable question, but reaching toward an answer is really where I'm at.
And I would say safer, and then just the level of opportunity that exists by the virtual transformational power of technology and everything that they have that I never had.
Yeah.
I would agree. Safer but fragmented, and fragmenting more every day.
Interesting. Right.
So no social networks, young child, unless I give you the permission. Hey, I just signed up for Musical.ly. That's not a social network. Well, what do you mean you just signed up for Musical.ly? Are you sharing videos? Yeah, but that's not a social network. That's not Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I don't have one of those. Well, what's Musical.ly? What's XYZ app, and what are the safeguards? And so I think helping parents and educators stay just aware I mean, today they're using Snapchat, tomorrow they're going to be using something else, and these things emerge
Yes.
overnight.
It's that speed
Right? And Musically for me was that example where, again, I'm in this space, I see these companies come in and out, and she just thought it was okay. That she didn't need to come ask.
Because it's not a social media.
Yeah.
By definition.
By
she brought to
definition. And so
to
I think
light.
helping, the safeguards are in place, educating on what these destinations are, if you will, and then how to safeguard within them is the battle.
Great.
And I would agree. I think we are safer, and I tend to think that I think we're in the third phase of our internet use. And to me, the first phase was dominated by the early adopters. So especially in social media land, it was mostly adolescents and young adults. And I think what I heard a lot from parents at that time was, it's only online. At least he's sitting on MySpace and not out causing trouble. And so to me, it was as though you took a giant warehouse in every city and crowded it with teenagers and said nothing bad could ever happen here. So to me, that was the first phase. And I think the second phase was we as adults joined the party. We got our iPhones, we got our Blackberries, we started going on Facebook, and we saw that reflected in the data of the rise of adults on social media. But the downside was many of us started acting like the adolescents that we saw on social media. And so to me, I think today we're in this third phase where we're saying, what are the values and culture that we want to take from our offline world, and what can we represent online? How can we be accountable to ourselves and our identities, both online and offline? And I think that's what is represented by the quality of discourse you're hearing today.
I would say it's a world of endless opportunities. So when I look back at the resources that I had when I was a teenager to the resources that are available nowadays, it's day and night. But of course, with those new opportunities comes new challenges, and it's how we address these challenges together as the technology companies, civil society, experts, academia, etc. So I would say really it's a combination. I think there's a lot more resources. Even when I just look at tech, when I first started working on this space, safety wouldn't necessarily come as a first thought. It was more an afterthought.
Right.
It's like, oh,
A
we're
reaction.
going to allow images to be shared. Oh, we just saw a first case of abuse. While now it would be, we're going to enable images to be shared. We have to provide a mechanism for people to report immediately. So I think the companies are better prepared now, but as you say, teenagers will shift from one platform to another, and it's a shared responsibility for us to share our learnings with all of the other companies that are coming after us.
Very good. Questions now. Do we have microphones, or how do we? Forgive me, I didn't. We have a mic, so wait so everybody can hear you, and we'll start there, and we'll sort of swing back forth. I'll try to recognize as many people as we can.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Sheree Mitchell. I formed the first organization called Digital Sisters in 1999 to get young girls of color online. One of our biggest challenges during that time was the parents. And the challenge that I still see now in what we're talking about in this particular space, because I still see that the girls of color are coming online, but they're being attacked a lot. What I don't see is the diversity that goes with the tools to address the things that Patricia, you talked about, the take a bus perspective, coming from different communities that have a different form of harassment. One example I'll give is the things that I see that happens to moms of color is being threatened. Their child is being threatened by saying, hope your child doesn't become a hashtag. That is a death threat. And so to the point that I want to get at in terms of safety, one of our biggest problems is still the diversity side of this. And how do we address that? Because we bring our civil society behavior online.
Please.
So that is a great point. And actually, in our most recent announcement, when we talked about hateful conduct, we didn't change the external facing rules. Those remain. We protect people by, the protected categories that are in the UN Charter of Human Rights. But one of the things that we did, and this has taken the last best of 12 months, is the hiring of people from diverse backgrounds with different perspectives, but also coming from, as I said, different markets because abuse takes place in a different way. And so even on the enforcement side, it's extremely important to have a very diverse team that can understand how does abuse look like in Japan? How does it look like in the US? How does it look like in Colombia or Mexico? So that's one of the measures that we started looking at. But secondly, actually in February, we launched a Trust and Safety Council, which is really a framework that enables us to get feedback from organizations that are working on different issues that touch upon safety, coming from many different backgrounds. And that has it's really been a game changer, because we're not talking to just like the FOSSes of this world, but we're also talking to Black girls who code and other organizations who, as you say, are being targeted more than others. And we see this in our own data. We see that there are specific groups of the population that are getting targeted more than others. And we have to include better protection mechanisms within our side, but also ensure that we're having that dialogue. So I would just connect with you after, but I would say if you want to be one of the people that gives us feedback, that's my job. That's why I do outreach, is precisely to create a bridge of communication and ensure that we have as many diverse voices as we can, and we understand how abuse happens differently depending on the background where you come from.
And please, Jen.
And I would just point out that I'll preview something that we're planning for Safer Internet Day 2017, which I'm sure all of you know is February the 7th, and some of you in the room have been apprised of some of these developments. But I was shocked this morning to see how strikingly similar research that we've conducted is with what Amanda showed earlier. We're trying to make the case for what we're calling digital civility. And come Safer Internet Day, we're going to have specific research in 14 countries about 17 different risks across 4 categories. The research is just going to be, as Stephen always references, that baseline evidential foundation from which we are going to hopefully make this case for digital civility, where we're going to have various assets, various smart practices for various stakeholder groups, whether it be technology companies or members of civil society or academics or policymakers or what have you, to start that conversation and to start that dialogue of building that platform. And there could be various initiatives, various programs, but just rooted in that concept of, can we do a little bit better with each other online? Can we have certain values that we embrace? Is this the time for instituting some kind of social norms, or at least some best practices that we could discourage some of the personal threats and discourage the name calling? Can we still have free and open debate, but again, sans the prior? So I would just, we've released 2 blogs already. We talked to both teens, 13 to 17 in 14 countries, as well as adults 18 to 74. And we asked them about their experiences and interactions with 17 different online risks. And very similar, again, to what Amanda was referencing, we had 65% of all of those polled said that they had experienced at least one of those online risks. And it led to various things. For adults, it led particularly to offline consequences, loss of trust in others, stress, increased stress, sleeplessness. The one positive note in that, though, was that adults said that about a third, again, about 29-30%, said that when something negative happened to them, their reaction was that they tried to offer more constructive criticism to others the next time something happened. So I think there is a little ray of light there, but I just preview that and ask you to look out for it. Again, we've released 2 preliminary looks at the research in our blogs, one looking at the teens' time to the back-to-school time frame, and then one looking at the adults' time to post-U.S. election, and time to World Kindness Day, which I didn't know about, but it happened on November the 13th.
Sounds like a very kind thing. Do we have someone with the microphone already, or can we go? We'll go on this side and come back if we could. So here.
Thank you. Catherine Steiner-Adair, Harvard Med School, author of The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age. I think one thing that I see over and over in my research in America and in other countries as well that we have to keep in mind, which has been mentioned a little bit here today, on the issue of safety. Where are we safer or not? I think another way of looking at the question is also, where is the fallout bigger? Because the psychological fallout of harassment and abuse when it's done online is actually more impactful than face-to-face. In other words, in research with girls and young women who have had sexual abuse, bad hookups, they say that is not even rape. That is not as damaging psychologically in the long term for them as a very bad online experience. So there's a whole other realm that we have to add to the conversation, which is what is the consequences psychologically long term of cruelty, harassment, and abuse online, and then how in schools and how through psychiatrists, psychologists, support networks do we also make it safe for people to get help and provide the services for them to get help, which is a whole new area that we have to pay attention to. As we've seen since smartphones have come out, a huge spike in just anxiety, period. And a lot of this is the psychological
question
fallout.
to one of these folks based on
And
their
my
work?
question
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
my question
Please,
is, yeah.
just to move us to get as many people
what
as we
are
can.
you thinking about in terms of creating support of information, education, et cetera, to people who are struggling in this way? You know, what are the programs you're going to create for educators, and where, you know, what's the for doctors, et cetera, because this is a huge issue that we need to also address.
So I'll give you, I mean, I glanced over the Digital U program that AT&T kind of puts out there. It's digitalu.att.com. And again, we partner with Common Sense Media, who is an expert in the space, to provide the tools to educate. And so, just as an example, we've done 140 events across the country using that platform and that material and that data to go and educate the community. And it's our employees going out and taking that information and educating parents and educators and senior citizens and families. I mean, you name it, right? And so lots of data. How do we synthesize the data, package it, and empower people that have passion for this particular topic, which is an important one, to go out and educate? So I think that's one. Second, the kids themselves can be can carry the message because they're the ones living it. And so, as an example, we just did a wonderful thing of really marrying what I would, our entertainment side, the media side of our business, with the connectivity side of our business. We partnered with the Tyler Clementi Foundation to do some polling in New York. Step one. Step two, partnered with the American High School Film Festival to create a film invitational that allows high school kids to come in and create documentaries telling these stories, most of which are their own. And I had a hard time watching some of these films, but for their peers to be able to tell their stories visually and creatively was extremely impactful. And so, look, this isn't about AT&T per se, this is about this topic, but I can tell you as a company, and again, coming here as a parent, I'm extremely proud of what we're doing to do just what you're suggesting, which is educating parents, educators, and allowing these kids themselves to educate the community.
Very good. We have a question on the other side of the room over there.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Boudre. I'm the Director of Library Programs for DC Public Schools. And I am thrilled to say that every one of our library media specialists, that we have one in every school, is being tasked with teaching digital citizenship using Common Sense Media Education curriculum, which is fabulous. But I think one of the challenges that we have, and there is an ask as opposed to a question here, one of the challenges that we have, especially as librarians, is that digital citizenship, as with information literacy, which is our subject, is taught as an other. It is a separate thing. And my frustration and my ask 4 years ago when I came to this conference was, can we please stop saying digital citizenship and talk about teaching people to be citizens in a digital world? And it's a very different concept. But my ask is there, what ways can companies and corporations and organizations really push education to ensure that this is included in every single content area, in conversation, not treated as this separate thing that my librarians are going to hit, 2 and 3 hours over the course of a year so that we are, check the box digital citizenship certified. And, so my ask is, what can we do to be able to work together to make this a more comprehensive approach?
And I'd have to say, over the years I've been associated with this, that's the message that keeps coming through, is it's not somebody else's responsibility, or it's not a single tactic, if I'm, again, being the amateur on the moment here, but turning to the experts, what's the response to that ask?
Well, one thought to me that I'm reflecting on is that what you're describing also sounds similar to some of the questions and thoughts we had as a committee in thinking about this bullying report and wrestling with the idea that some of the scientific literature says cyberbullying is this new thing. It is the worst thing ever. It's happening everywhere, and it's totally different than bullying. And some of the other literature saying, hey, here's traditional bullying. It often happens in schools, and we think that it's now migrating to these online platforms. So I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're saying this is the worst thing ever online or this is the worst thing ever offline. And I think the more that we can bring those two worlds together, as you mentioned, to talk about citizenship, to talk about kindness, to talk about bullying as something that happens online and offline. And that opens us up to this huge new world of resources where, for example, in our report, we talked about being able to learn from some of the successful bullying interventions that have happened in schools and see what lessons can we take that we could apply online. So if we view this as one huge connected world instead of two separate ones, we can draw on resources from both the online and offline literature.
If I may add something there, I agree with you. And at Twitter, we have worked a lot with Common Sense Media, but we also have Ann Collier that is working with I Can Help Now. We have Alan Simpson in the room who's been helping us create a guide for educators. And I think that the importance here is not to separate. It's not necessarily about what goes wrong with the technology. It's how to also use the technology. Because the reality is, a lot of the educators that we engage with will say, the students are using this. How can we incorporate it so that it's not just the negative harassment has taken place, we have to address the harassment, but more, how can we be a part of the conversation and how can this be a tool that can be utilized for education? And so in our case, through Alan, but also in San Francisco in particular, we have the Neighbor Nest, which is our community center. It's placed in the Tenderloin, and we have been partnering with not just Common Sense Media, but United Playas to work with different schools where we're talking to the students, the parents, and the teachers in classes that, of course, wouldn't scale globally, but we're looking at how can we use Twitter for good? How can we utilize all of our employees worldwide and create this curriculum that is more about Twitter in education, which addresses safety too, but is wider than that, and is the possibility of the technology, and to bring that to a global stage.
We have time for a question there and one more, I think, and then unfortunately, we'll be out of time to move things along.
Thank you. Ann Collier with, my latest thing is social media helpline for schools. We're working very hard to take it national right now. A number of us in the room have served on a number of national task forces about internet safety, and one that was, I can't believe, almost a decade ago at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center now. One of the major findings of the Lit Review that was done and led by Dana Boyd back then found that, the primary risk that young people face is cyberbullying, and that it's an emotional risk, right? It's a psycho-emotional social risk that young people face online. And what I'm astonished by is that we don't talk about social literacy enough. We always default to digital literacy, but it's social emotional learning that prepares children to deal with the issues online that they face. So I'm asking you that. Why don't we associate media literacy? Absolutely. That's a form of safety. And social literacy with safety in digital spaces.
I think some of your programs are actually addressing that, if I'm not mistaken, just what I was able to do some research on. Perhaps Jacqueline might talk?
Exactly. That's precisely one of the things that we're advocating for with this new digital civility campaign. And it's what the other questioner asked about as well, that integration. There are opportunities within a regular school curriculum to integrate these types of messages for the digital world, for the social media world, for technology in general. Because when it comes to the kids, as we all know, it is in fact one world. It's not segmented in any way. It may be fragmented in some instances, but it's not segmented. It is one world, and all of it needs to be addressed at those opportunities. But yeah, we're big proponents of social and emotional learning, of course, in the right context. It's not going to work for every country of the world and every culture, but it is a good starting place for sure.
And it also forms the backbone of most of the successful school-based bullying programs. So I think it's another great example where we can draw from what works in the offline bullying world and translate that into the online bullying world instead of reinventing a wheel.
Thank you. Again, we could, I think, hear from all four, but we're going to move to our last question just to keep the program on time. So we have someone here.
Hi, thank you again for all being here together. My name is Jennifer Bilbrow, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I have a social media company, but I'm a grassroots, on the ground, teaching moms and dads, schools, churches, all over my community about online safety, social media safety. So my question for all of you and for Fosse, I guess, is there one resource or one place where you can go where all of the information that all of you have in this room is curated? Like all of this is so fragmented and separated and not together, and there's so many amazing tools, but how can we get it all in one place so when someone asks me a question, I can say, you need to go here, not 17 different websites to find that content?
Well, if I may, I think that is part of what Fosse's mission is to collate a lot of this information and make it easily available. Steve, you give me a thumbs up. Thank God I didn't say the wrong thing. But you know, that in an increasingly either fragmented or segmented world, I mean, that's really an outstanding question. You know, I think one of the things that we got very accustomed to early on was that we could type in and up comes 50,000 things. Now it's 500,000 things, and really where they're more focused, and it goes to a question of validation about news sources. You know, we're beginning to get overwhelmed, from my perspective, again, in just delivering news and information. We're beginning to get overwhelmed by this tidal wave, again, in ways we never dreamed would be possible. We looked at all the great ideas of having all this wonderful information, and we forgot about the curators who helped us sort through it in the earlier days, maybe only between 20 or 30 sources, but now, how do you do it for 2 million or was it 1 billion tweets?
1 billion tweets every 2 days, yes.
You know, of what of those do I need to read? I honestly, you know, I mean, in all honesty, all of them. Well, thank you. Well,
mine are pretty good, I would say. So maybe you want to follow me there.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Let me say so
But
myself.
she's your curator.
Yeah, but I think you know, that is a great challenge, and that may be a challenge for, in different ways, everybody on this platform, to begin to help everybody sort through all the clutter, because you have questions you have to answer now, I assume. You all have challenges right now. And I know in talking to people dealing with fake news, and since it came up in the last election cycle, is just how do we address that with so much flooding in from everywhere, and how do you parse it? Any other responses to
Yeah, I mean,
a
I
very
would
good
say
question?
Fosse.org for sure, but beyond Fosse, you can look at what some countries have done. Like the UK, for instance, has the UK's Council. It's a government force that brings together academia, civil society, tech, and we provide them with a lot of information. Everybody that is part of UKIS, we provide them with information. So that's like a wonderful result in the UK. If you look at Australia, the e-safety commissioner has similar resources. And just today, Fosse in their recommendations spoke about the creation of the e-safety commissioner and a task force. And I think that's a very good way to bring a lot of information together. The countries where we have seen it have been very effective in bringing all of those really together. And of course, in the meantime, you have all of the safety centers of the tech companies. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're looking for resources from academia or different boards. But maybe that's something that we should lobby for with Stephen's support, you know, like that creation of a government body that can bring together that wealth of information and experts.
Or it could be another section of GRID.
Well, there we are. Stephen, I think we're to you. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in thanking our panel.